Hello, everyone around the world. Welcome. Bienvenidos, que calos irfete, to Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I'm your host, Lauren Battistini, color consultant, artist, language learner, and world traveler. Join me each week as I chronicle the most colorful people, places, and experiences I encounter off the beaten path, both near and far. So, let's go. Vámonos, que pame. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Today's guest was born in Italy, yet is a French national. He's lived in multiple countries, speaks several languages, and has finally settled with his wife and kids in the picturesque town of Porto, Portugal. Having gained experience in the tobacco, wine, and spirits industries, he set off on his own entrepreneurial venture back in 2014 to launch a branding consultancy. His Porto, Paris, London-based firm is named Brand Reveal, and their aim is to do just that, to reveal the very best of your brand, utilizing multicultural sensitivity and yielding the most global mileage possible in the process. Welcome to Coloring My Way Across the Globe, Mr. Henri Sizaret.
Hi, Lorraine.
Thank you so much for joining me this morning, all the way from Porto, Portugal. Is it sunny there today?
Actually, it's a bit rainy, but because we are in front of the Atlantic, so yes, southern of Europe, but rainy as well.
Okay, well, it's a little bit gray here in Houston, Texas, but we have many happy topics to discuss. So let's launch right in. I'd like to discuss some things about your business. So as a brand consultant with decades of experience in the, again, tobacco, wine, and spirits industries, I would like to know if anything calls to mind, a case study or a project you've worked on where you feel that color and color placement made all the difference in either the success or the failure of a product launch.
Yes, actually, I started my career, as you mentioned, in tobacco with Philip Morris, and I was a brand manager for Marlboro. And I remember back then that each time I proposed different programs, creative expressions, campaigns to my boss, he often said the same thing. It's very nice, but put more red. And I couldn't understand why he wanted to have a more red all the time. And actually, and I thought it was an obsession of his, like Marlboro has to be red and white and so on. But what I came to realize bit by bit is that in the environment where we were operating, the color actually was important to start building and contributing to the awareness of the brand, so much to the point that we could even show pieces of work like point of sales material or some advertisement where you would just have the color red and some white, and people would associate it very, very quickly, very, very strongly with the brand. And in a world where you have got a lot of brand competing for attention, being able to have this kind of snap and quick connection just based on colors, I think is a big win. And I've mentioned the case of tobacco because that's where I cut my teeth in marketing, but I think it's true for just any brand. You know, the faster you are in terms of recognition, the better it is for you.
I agree with you, and I have a question slash observation. You know, I'm a color consultant myself, working in the architectural space. However, I do recognize that color consistency across all platforms is important. So once the exact color has been selected, it needs to be consistent on both digital and physical platforms, paper products, the logo colors displayed on a screen. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And I absolutely agree. And to go along your lines, I would say it can be color or a combination of colors or a combination of colors and shape, which matter. Because when we look and we read at things, we often do it very quickly. And the way human attention is built, the first thing we react to is colors. So the more consistent you are in the implementation, so we've mentioned color, but also the layout of certain things, the stronger the recognition you will have when you are exposed to certain elements. So yes, it is very, very important.
Yes. How do you all in your agency, how do you ensure that color consistency is achieved? And I ask this question because something as simple as business cards, I have beautifully designed business cards, and when I went to do a reprint recently, the shade of green was not quite right, and it threw off my branding. And I had to have it completely reprinted to the right exact green. How do you all ensure color consistency with your clients?
I think it's the first thing in a way when you build the whole branding system is to come up with clear definitions about the colors you want to use and to work with your creative partner to find the construction or the definition of the color depending on the different supports that you are going to use, because the way you are going to use a color X on a paper or on the screen, or on the video or on TV is not going to be the same. I think you need to define with this person the kind of parameters that define what is acceptable and not acceptable in terms of variance versus your original, I would say, standard that you have, and that can be very funny because if you come back to the example of Marlboro, I remember an episode where there were conversations with the F1 team Ferrari, and they agreed together. That was in the 80s or in the 90s. They agreed together that the livery of the car, the red that we know, would actually tend towards the orange in actual life.
Hmm.
Why? When you shoot this color on TV, or at least with the TV systems that you had back then, the orange would darken and turn more red, actually, which is what we wanted to have, because the TV diffusion would be the big exposure of the brand. So you even have tricks sometimes in which you have to accept that your color is not going to be the original in actual terms, but depending on the medium or and the media that you're going to use,
Yes.
it will get closer to what you are looking for.
That's right. And you've brought a good point to light, which is that color, the way that we see color, it depends on what surface it's printed on. And it also
Yes.
depends upon the light that's reflecting off of it. So color is very, very finicky, I will say. And I deal with this a lot in the architectural color specification world. I'll select a paint color, for example, for an interior, and that singular paint color, though it combines quite well with all of the other elements and finishes in the space, it will look different at different times of day and in different rooms depending on shadows and light. So,
Yeah, the also sorry, yeah, you've mentioned the room in the business of the spirits, where you have got a lot of labels printed. You also will look at the paper and the nature of the paper, its absorption capacity, for instance, of the ink, but also its natural color and the reflections when you are going to decide on the color, when you're going to calibrate the color for the printout. And
um,
actually, a good printer for that would have a room with a special white light to actually compare the color you want to have. And in some cases, these lights have to be replaced at least every year to make sure that you have a constant standard of lighting to compare the labels that you want to do. So it can go very far, actually, in
yes,
terms the precision that you look for.
we literally, color, people don't understand that color is both art and science. And we literally could go down a rabbit hole talking about all of the different intricacies here. And you, of all
Yeah,
people, would understand being involved in branding. So, speaking of branding, and this is your area of expertise, I'm curious to know what are all of the different areas of branding that you have to consider when you're putting together a campaign for, let's say, your latest wine label?
I think the first thing you want to ensure that your campaign does is that you have awareness, and that your brand is recognized. The first thing is that people have to know who's talking. That's the thing. And in marketing terms, you will talk about salience. or distinctivity. The distinctivity is the property of a brand or of a sign to actually stand out from the rest and to be specifically recognized as such. And the second point that you want to do in your campaign, and this is why you do a campaign, is that you will want to create positive associations or memories. So like your product is good or it's perfect for this kind of occasions and so on. So in theoretical terms, what you want to have is something that you recognize and something that you associate with good moments. And it's this association that you'll want to do. And this is why you do a campaign. Because if you did only branding, people would recognize you but find you boring. Or if you only did the positive aspects of the brand, you would never know who is talking to you. So you have to balance these two aspects. Um, and I think that should be the rule number one, no matter the channel you are talking, whether it's an outdoor poster or it's a video or it's TV, cinema, internet, etc., etc. You have to be recognized and you have to connect with something positive. That's the way brands grow in today's world.
Yes, and also it seems to me, and again, I'm a color expert and nothing more than that. But from with branding, there are so many different elements to consider. You've got topography, imagery, graphic design, the color placement, as you said earlier, product labeling, the name that you select. I've read some of your case studies that you've published on LinkedIn, and you have done a good job, I think, of storytelling and marrying all of those different elements to create a consistent message across the board to keep these brands from being boring. They all seem very interesting to me. I think I commend you. You've worked on a lot of great projects.
Thanks. I think you've touched another point, which is what we call the brand positioning, which is simply making sure that you know what your brand stands for, and you know what's the ultimate message the brand wants to communicate. Is it a brand about togetherness? Is it a brand that, to stand out and show your difference? These are the fundamental questions that you want to ask yourself. And based on that, you are going to align all the different elements of the brand, which is the product story, the myth, the origin, the founders, your tone of voice, to actually go towards this same direction, because it's very easy to get lost in all the details and the fantastic stories that a brand can say. So you need to find your positioning. I think in journalism terms, we talk about the angle. What's the angle of the article?
Mhm.
What's the story you want to say? And I think this is the same for every brand, which can be simple, but not always, because it's that one sentence, magical sentence you want to have that says that my brand is all about dot dot dot. That's the thing,
Mm.
and the rest is expresses and proves your point that you want to make.
Yes, yes. Well, these are all fascinating elements. I am a huge fan of branding, and I have an accounting degree, but in retrospect, I think were I to do this all over again and study at university, I think I would have definitely studied marketing. It fascinates me. So I appreciate your insights there.
Yes, it is fascinating. You blend in a lot of different aspects, which can be social, cultural, artistic, and if you have a nose for that, the business side also is very interesting, because you have the commercial aspect as well. So
Yes.
it's a very, I mean, I like to do what I do because it's in a way it's very I find encompassing discipline
Mm.
where you can do many things.
Most definitely. Well, we have many topics to cover. Let's switch gears for a moment. I'd like to talk about some culture and language aspects. You have quite a very interesting family dynamic. So, you and your wife live in Porto, Portugal. You're a French
Yes,
national. So, you're a French national. She's a German national. And then you
yes.
have children together. So, I would like for you to share some perspective with us on how you have made space for and kind of passed down both French and German culture and maybe language to your children in a very, what I would describe as multilingual, multicultural, and expat household because you all are not native to the Portugal, but you live there.
Yeah, we live in Portugal now. It's going to be about 15 years now, soon. And we have three children whom are all grown up and finished school and left home, actually. But you are raising a very interesting question because me speaking French, I mean, I always spoke French with my kids, and my wife always spoke German with them. However, when I met with my wife, our, I would say, intimate language is English because we met at university when we were in Scotland. So what's funny at home is that depending on the language that you hear, you know who's talking to who, because if it's English, it's going to be actually me and my wife. If it's French, it's going to be my kid and myself. And if it's German, it's going to be with my wife. So, you know, we always had this flexibility. And I think what we also wanted to be sure is that each of the kids get a good slice of what is it to be French and what is it to be German. We never tried to pull the cover towards one or the other. And sometimes they ask us, "What are we?" And we told them, "You are Franco-German or German or Franco French, which is both of these worlds." And I think it amplifies indirectly this idea about Europe because you go beyond just your the citizenship or single citizenship with that. So that's how we did it. It's really wanting to preserve, I think, or transmit our cultural luggage or heritage to the kids by, I would say, respecting the tongues with that we speak with.
You are listening to Coloring My Way Across the Globe. Stories of the most colorful people, places, and experiences off the beaten path, both near and far, as hosted by myself, Lauren Battistini. Each week, I'll be interviewing color professionals, artists, world travelers, language learning experts, digital nomads, other entrepreneurs, creative professionals, visionaries. There's something here for everyone interested in the world around them. Keep listening, there's more to follow. Well, I like your approach. I think that you and your wife did this properly because you imparted to your children both the languages and the cultures. And that's important. So, am I to understand that in your household, you've got English spoken, French spoken, German spoken, and then I would assume after 15 years in Portugal, Portuguese as well, or do you speak Portuguese in the home or only outside of the home?
No, we never speak Portuguese at home. However, funnily enough, my kids sometimes they speak Portuguese in between them, obviously with their friends, but also among them. And also the other day they were speaking English among them. So they basically, I think, pick the language that fits, I think, the situation. So it's kind of as if they've gone beyond a certain frame of expressing themselves, and they just go and pick what they think fits well, which eventually I think gives you a certain form of flexibility and hopefully mental elasticity to be able to switch perspectives and express yourself in different ways.
Oh, most definitely. And you'll appreciate this when I say this, that speaking different languages, you have a different feeling in each language. When I speak Spanish as my second language, English obviously is my first, Greek is my third that I'm trying to learn. And I would say that I become all of a sudden a lot more emotional when I start speaking Spanish. There's just a little bit more of a romanticism or feeling to it, a little more passion to it, I think. And the same holds true with Greek. So, I think that your children are very well equipped in, at least speaking from a business perspective and a relationship perspective as well. They're so well equipped because they're not only multilingual, they're multicultural, and they have an understanding of, I'm going to use the word contextuality or the context in which to
Yes.
utilize and to implement these different languages. I think it's very fascinating. It requires a certain, you did say it earlier, mental elasticity and flexibility. So, very.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, when you can speak the language of the person in front of you, you kind of make a step towards this person. And in business, it's always good, I think, because it means that you show actively that you want to get closer to the partner in front of you, and that you actually want to start collaborating and so on with the person. So if you make the effort actually to speak the same language, you will get also the finesse and a kind of you're going to be a bit of an accomplice of the person because you're going to create a bond. And your point of the emotion is also very good. I mean, I swear in Italian. There is no better language than Italian to swear because it's hairy, it's full, it's powerful, it says what it says, and nobody remains untouched when you
That's right. And
swear.
then and when you speak in Italian, you also have to use your hands. Otherwise, it's not really quite Italian.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
You have to gesticulate. So now's a great time for us to take a break. And when we come
Mhm.
back, we're going to talk about the expat culture.
Okay.
Okay, now here we have a little pause. I'll insert a commercial break. Okay, welcome back to the show, everyone. We're going to begin talking a little bit with Henri Sizaret about his experience living in Porto, Portugal with his wife and kids. We're going to talk a little bit about expats. So, Henri, I have visited Porto, Portugal. I visited last year in February and March. I thought it was absolutely stunning and beautiful. I'm told that there's a very vibrant and well accepted expat community there. So, what's been your family's experience in Porto?
Let's say so far so good because it's nearly 15 years that we live here in Porto. So Portugal is actually the longest country I've been living in right now. I haven't lived that much, for instance, that long in France or in any other countries. And I think that what is pleasing about Porto is that it's a relatively calm country on the one hand, because even if it's Southern Europe, it doesn't have the Mediterranean, I would say, fiery culture that we know about the Italians, the Greeks, or North Africa, or Spanish. It's more Atlantic. So in this sense, it's kind of a more laid back or a bit more British, if you like. And on the other hand, because it's a country that joined relatively late the European Union, I think it was 84 if I'm not wrong, it's still a bit, I would say, unspoiled in terms of economic development. And by that, I mean there are still a lot of things to be done, and it's still relatively underdeveloped in certain aspects. So I think these two elements make it a country which is interesting for people who wanted to live in a relatively pleasant environment. But at the same time, if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, it's a place where you can do many interesting things because you will not find necessarily the same competition or activity that you would have in other places like the US or France or the UK, to name a few.
Mm. Well, I'll tell you that my experience there, I was in Porto with a friend of mine. She's a teacher and does a lot of work in consulting and equipping other teachers, other educators. And so we were there for maybe a week, and I found it to be a gorgeous, walkable community. People were quite friendly, uh, and they do strike me as being very cultured, well mannered, well dressed, a little bit more restrained. I didn't see, but people seem to be a little quieter than.
Yes, I agree with you. I would describe the Portuguese stereotype because obviously you always have distinctions as perhaps being a bit more introvert and more calm and more mild-mannered, perhaps than other places. Yes, definitely. And I think
Mm,
it's perhaps part a bit of culturally speaking, they also had in the 50s, the 60s, up to 70s, a way of living which basically was all about, tranquility. Okay. And Salazar, who was actually a Portuguese leader slash dictator, or at least an authoritarian regime until the mid 70s, had a profound impact on this generation, which really was all about about being obedient. You see, not make any noise, being tranquil, and this kind of approach, I think, in a society which also was quite had a strong sense of hierarchy because it was very rural with very, I would say, many peasants, had its impact. I think that you can still feel today. But having said that, the last 10, 15 years, Portugal has changed a lot in terms of being more buoyant, open, in the know, trendy, etc., etc. That's the I think it's the change is really coming now.
Mm, interesting. Well, I found Porto to be lovely. I really enjoyed the experience there. It's definitely a place I would want to return to visit. So let's switch gears one more time. And I want to refer back to a conversation that you and I had, which was we had this conversation a few weeks back about how both of us, you and I, are equal parts logic and creativity. And so I want to ask you, that's how you've described yourself. How does that manifest in both your professional and personal life?
I think uh, when you work and you do things, you realize that at least in my case, doing always the same thing becomes boring. And this is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to, I shifted my studies from engineering to actually business, because I found that in business, at least the topics were much more varied than just doing engineering, which was a lot of maths and physics and so on, which I personally ended up finding boring. But in the whole process, I also found that, the business approach in itself was a bit boring. So um, I also knew that the creative aspect was also strong. So if you like, that's why I talk about the logic and the creative side of things being important for me, because when I work on and I do a business and I do consultancy, you try to build the systems and explanations with the clients, and you know that by showing the creative side or developing the creative side, you can give an interpretation that sometimes enriches a lot what you can propose. And at the same time, being creative for me is a bit of a playground. I mean, childrens are very much about that. It's like when you play, you create stuff. When you make a sandcastle or you play Lego, it's about being creative. It's about letting your brain go and imagine things. So it's yes, it's a fresh air ball for me.
I enjoy hearing your perspective, and I find that my most notable conversations, my most pleasant conversations, are really with people who have this duality of thinking, the logical side and the creative side. And I think most people have it to a degree, but people who have it very well balanced, like yourself, I find our conversations to be really pleasant because we're able to toggle between both worlds. In my world, as you know, I do architectural color, but I also do this podcast. I also do art. I'm an emerging artist. And so the creative side of my brain is always at work. And so I appreciate hearing your perspective on kind of the balance between logic and creativity. And in your line of work as a branding consultant, you do utilize both sides of your brain every day.
Yes, absolutely. Especially when you also need to speak with quote unquote the real creatives, i.e., the people who are going to develop for you the graphic language, because you need to be able to understand what they propose and then to retranslate it to the client who may not have the time or the sensitivity to understand all the intricacies. And you have to be able to inspire as well, the guys who are behind the drawing board. So it's not just about like make the brand younger or whatever. You need to feed them with ideas. And again, you need to when you go and fetch for inspiration, you have to have this sensitivity to know, okay, does this culture, does these examples match what I want to have? Yes or no? And yes, and this can go very far. This morning, I had a conversation with colleagues about some brand, and we've done some semiotic analysis. And in the semiotic analysis, you try to deconstruct all the symbols, all the signs, down to the letter, down to the touch of the label, to the colors, the meaning of the colors, and so on and so forth, to understand what are the explicit signs of the brand and the implicit one that nobody talks, but yet have an influence on your perception. So
Yes.
yeah.
Very, very good insights. So, switching gears one more time, you mentioned in one of our last conversations that you also have a side, I'll call it a passion project, but it's more than that probably for you. You have musical talent and in a particular genre of music. So, what we're going to do for our audience members is we're going to play them a snippet of a MP3 file that you sent me, some of your music. And when we come back from the break, I want to talk about your musical career.
Mondo atomico. Mondo atomico. Politico. Mondo atomico.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. We've got guest Henri Sizaret, and now we're talking about another exciting aspect of his life, which is music creation. So, you mentioned having this area of your life where you're absolutely free to create without any constraints, rules, or concerns of adhering to anyone's standard. It's just something free flowing for you. So, talk to us about your musical endeavors.
Yes, so music is another important aspect of what I do, and it connects back to the conversation we had earlier on about the logic and the creative side. And I've always been creative in the sense that when I was a kid, I loved drawing. And in my teen years, I started like all the teens, socializing, and very much at the time you had a fashion around the new wave music like Depeche Mode, just to name one of the bands. And actually, I was always fascinated by how these guys and all these bands came up with new sounds and somehow new attitudes. So this always worked up in me, up to the point that in the 90s, I ended up meeting with a couple of twins in Frankfurt who produced some techno, and they showed me how they did it, with a computer, keyboards, and so on. And then I thought, right, I'd like to do the same. I'd like to invent my own sounds, my own landscapes, my own stories. And I really started in 93 with some cracked software and some machines that I found. And it never stopped until then. And the other day I was counting, actually, I think in nearly 30 years, I must have written about 400 tracks and made nearly 150 videos. So
Oh
yes,
my goodness, you know
there's
what?
something happening behind.
This is definitely more than just some passing hobby. This is absolutely a huge integral part of your life. I'm very impressed.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so it started very much under the name of Electrocute as a pun. And then in the year 2000, I decided to rebrand myself. And funny because we were mentioning branding into the into AKA, also known as, but it's also the phonetic aka of the H letter in Italian. So you see how how you start creating connections with meanings, as we were discussing before. And what I like doing actually when I produce music is to be perfectionist in the production, in the theme, and in the execution. I print some CDs, I make some videos, and what I like to do is that when people look at it, is to think that I was a great band because everything is leaked and perfect.
Nice. Okay, so this is where the perfectionistic, maybe a little bit of that engineering side in you comes out.
Yes, 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 yes. It's a bit of a persona in a way. I think there's a bit of that, like showing a built character that may or may not exist. It doesn't matter. You just like build something out of nothing, or perhaps out of, yes, some personal experiences, and then you put it in front of people. It's a bit like, the superheroes. They have a normal life and they have a fantastic life. So this is
That's
a project.
right.
This is
Two
where
different.
this is a project where I try to show, the wonderful life of things.
That is lovely. I'm fascinated by it, and I love having guests such as yourself who are so multi-talented and multifaceted. Definitely you lead what I would call a colorful lifestyle. So you have also traveled the world. You and your wife, you met while you were studying in Scotland, you said, but you've had lots of travels. So as a world traveler, I want to ask you, I'm also a world traveler. I'd like to ask you what your top three, and I know this will be hard to answer, but what three places come to mind that you visited are most interesting, and what makes them special?
But certainly the ones that came when you are asking these questions, I think I would say perhaps Peru. This is where I started growing up. My dad worked at United Nations, and we traveled a lot in Latin America. And I remember one of my first memories as a kid was like together with the family at weekends, we would go into old Inca cemeteries in the desert. And that marks you, especially because these were places where you have old mummies lying
Mm.
on with the skulls and so on, which is impressive. But as a kid, I found that it was a fantastic playground there. So that's one place which is quite, I would say, original, or at least memorable for me as a kid. I think the other place that really struck me is Brazil, uh, because there we used to go into a plot during the weekends with my family. My father bought a plot there, which was near Rio de Janeiro, because the sea actually in Rio is very dangerous. So he said, okay, instead of risking the kids at the sea, let's spend some time in the countryside. And there, what really struck me was the exuberance and the power of nature. Because when we were there, you had the snakes, you had monkeys, you had plants. I mean, just one thing. Say you take a bunch of beans, okay, and you drop them on the floor. 2 hours later, these are growing already.
Wow.
Just so that you see this kind of energy from nature. So that was really, I think, something that was quite impressive.
Hmm.
Perhaps the third point, making a big leap in time, would be Japan. I went to visit Japan last November together with my wife, and it's a place that I really like because it does, I think we've mentioned before, contextual displacement. You basically look at things with completely different eyes, and it's quite interesting to see how people look at aesthetics and relationships and so on. It really breaks completely all the, I would say, the perspectives and the certainties that you have got about yourself and about your culture. And I find it's very refreshing, actually.
Hmm.
And there's also an aesthetic side of things which I like a lot, because Japan is well organized. The floors are immaculate and clear. You could lick the floor. Everything is I would say, very, very well kept there, which for me personally is very pleasant.
You are listening to Coloring My Way Across the Globe. Stories of the most colorful people, places, and experiences off the beaten path, both near and far, as hosted by myself, Lauren Battistini. Each week, I'll be interviewing color professionals, artists, world travelers, language learning experts, digital nomads, other entrepreneurs, creative professionals, visionaries. There's something here for everyone interested in the world around them. Keep listening, there's more to follow.
Hmm. I will concur with your observations about Japan because last year my son Christian and I were there. It was a mom-son adventure. We were in Japan in May, and everything that you've observed here about Japan, he and I observed together. So I appreciate hearing your insights on three of the most interesting places, though you've traveled to many other countries I know. Let's rein it in and talk about Porto for a moment. I always like to visit places kind of off the beaten path anytime I travel. And I did find some nice kind of, I don't want to say hole in the wall places, but more off the beaten path, kind of family owned restaurants. So I wanted to know favorite places that you like to eat in Porto that you and your wife like to frequent that might not be so well known by tourists.
Yes, there are places that in Porto that I like. One is called Miss Oppo. This is a restaurant that you have in the center, and I like it because they bring in some kitchen from Angola. So this is a place where I've never been, Angola, but you have got there an interesting mixture between Portuguese cuisine and Angolan cuisine. So for me, it's a bit of a traveling into Africa.
Yeah,
Um,
it transports you.
yes, definitely, definitely. There's another place which I like, and it's not completely innocent from let's say my experiences in electronic music. It's called Maus Hábitos, which translate by bad manners.
Hmm.
Who is in the center, and it's very eclectic in the sense that the guys they don't only organize the concerts but also art exhibitions, and they also have restaurants and bars and so on. And every time they bring some food, they try to make it a bit original. So they will propose some pizzas, for instance, which everybody knows, but they try to do it a bit on their own with their own touch. And I find this is interesting. Um, and then in Porto, you still have quite a few small restaurants which you would call tasca, which I think I would translate perhaps as pocket in a way, where you can actually have your, there's nothing branded really there, and there's no real names. I mean, there's one not far from where I live, which is called Coma Bem, which means eat well. Okay, so it's
Hmm.
very straightforward. You go there and you can get your soup, your fish, your rice, and perhaps a beer for 6 or 7 euros. So it really doesn't cost a lot. It's very popular. It's not a high end, but it's good and solid food that is made in the back of the kitchen. At least
Mm.
you see the mamas doing the kitchen there.
Oh, I love it when someone's mama's cooking. That's always the best. So, for my guests, I'll make sure that I include the names of the referenced places. I'll include those in the description of the podcast.
Yeah.
I'll get those from you later on, Ray. Okay, so last question, but certainly not least in importance, is what does a colorful life or living in color look like to you?
I think having a colorful life is really about trying to make different and interesting things. That's one thing. I mean, if you always did the same thing, I think life would be boring, unless perhaps you excelled and wanted to specialize into one thing. So for me, colorful life is really it's really about variety in a way. But beyond that, apart from being colorful, I think a colorful life is also about taking care about others. I understand the differences, the reasons that lead people to decide certain things or feel certain things, and it's just about embracing about who they are and living together. That's a thing. In a way, it may sound cheesy, but the claim of the United Colors of Benetton actually is quite powerful if you think of
Oh,
it.
oh yes, I love that brand.
Yes, because it's about living together, and that actually could not be underestimated, especially in the days and times that we live today. You see, it's not something granted, really.
That's correct. Well, Andre, I would like to personally thank you for your time today and for sharing with us your insights and your perspective. And you are such a fascinating individual with such a rich history. And it's been such a pleasure to have you here on the podcast. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your time.
Thank you for your interest.
Of course. And so, for all of my listeners, How should they best get in touch with you? Let's say someone needs your assistance on branding. How would they reach you?
Well, I have an email, which is henri at brandreveal.net, but I'll send you the link. And for those who are more adventurous, you will have the Instagram on AKA Music with a Z. So
That's your alter ego, your other persona. I can't wait to follow you on Instagram, particularly there. So we'll include all of this information in the description of the podcast. So thank you again, Henri, for your time. And to all my listeners, I hope that you have a beautifully colorful week, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation, and we would love to stay connected with you throughout the week. The best way to connect is by subscribing to our newsletter at www.lfbcolor.com. That's www.l as in Lauren, F as in Frank, B as in boy, color, COLOR.com. Also, you may find us on Instagram using the same handle, LFBcolor, for the latest stories, podcast guest profiles, travel photography, language learning diaries, and my own colorful art. Hope to see you there, friends. Thank you again.